Back to that. Okay. Go. All righty. Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited for you joining us for our second webinar in our Seeing Ourselves, Seeing Each Other, Nurturing Healthy Identity in the Early Years Reflective Practitioner course. My name is Denisha Jones, and I'm the Executive Director of Defending the Early Years, and I'm leading this course, but I'm bringing in guests today. So I'm super excited to have my good friend. I should have asked you how to, I can say Yesenia. Did I say that right? Yesenia
Yeah.
Moya? Okay, I was looking at the last name and I was like, got it, got it. I know I'll mess it up. So we'll go with Yesenia Moya is here to join us for today's session, which is called Affirming Latine Identity in the Early Years. So I'll start by letting Yesenia introduce yourself a little bit. I can read your bio if you want, or if you want to talk about yourself, whatever you prefer.
It's always hard to talk about myself, but I am a organizer, educator, and artist. I do a lot of different work, but it's all based on helping people like reclaim their roots as a way to empower folks to resist and organize. And so a lot of times art is like universal, and so I use that as the vehicle to get folks engaged into some of this work. And I grew up undocumented here in the US, and as soon as I got my papers, I say, y'all messed up. Like, I'm not gonna be quiet now. So
Yeah.
it's a whole thing. I'm very proud of my roots, and even though I've grown up in this country for most of my life, like I'm very proud of where I'm from, and that's all thanks to my family and just that ability to keep community alive. So it's something that I carry with me all the time.
Awesome, awesome. And you're in Southern Nevada, right? Yes, I haven't
Yes.
been to Nevada since and I think we met. Did we first meet at the Free Mind, Free People conference in Baltimore? Was that the first time? I think so, and it was great. Yeah, you're a young student, all eager for the knowledge, and now you're today still young, but a kick-ass community organizer and educator doing that work. And the arts are super important to all of this work, and so that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned, I'm going to start sharing my screen. As we mentioned, we are doing each month we're picking a different racial and ethnic group, and we're talking about how to affirm that identity. So earlier this year, we released the fostering healthy identity framework in early childhood, and so that is, we use that framework to kind of talk about just healthy racial, ethnic, and cultural identity in the early years. We did a course on that where we took you through that framework. And now we're doing about affirming particular identities, right? So one of the things that I wanted to do this, so if you understand racial identity development theory, which is a lot, it comes out of psychology work and counseling, and each group has their own different kind of theory of development around racial identity. So there's the Black identity development, which started with Cross. Also, Jackson has done some work around that. There's the Latino ethno-racial orientations, which I thought was really interesting. It was one of the few that taken slightly different aspects. Sorry, I just had it open. Latina and Latino ethno-racial identity orientations. There's Asian American identity orientation. There's Native and Indigenous orientation, multiracial, and there's white racial identity development. So all of the theories look at how people progress through these different racial identities. Hi, Tori. Oh, here's Tori and Aaliyah. So we're going to let them in. This is a live webinar, so some of our subscribers are joining live, while other subscribers are going to watch the recording later. So welcome. We just got started. I introduced you, Senya, and we'll come back to that. And yeah, we're going to keep going for this webinar. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. We are recording, so just know if your camera's on, you may be in the recording that we send out to folks later, just subscribers to our Reflective Practitioner series. So all of the racial groups, some psychologists have gotten together and they studied this and they've created theories of development for different racial groups. So I've read all of these. I taught a course when I was at Sarah Lawrence College where students had to pick one to read, which means I had to read them all. And we had to talk about the differences in the theories of how racial identity develops. So what I wanted to do for this series was to take that knowledge of adolescent and adult identity development for each group, but then apply it to what we know about the early years. So we started with an early years we started with an overview of racial identity development webinar. So if you didn't see that, I will make sure the recording's shared in the group and you can watch that. But we talked generally about applying racial identity development theory to young children. So a couple of things to remember: that racial identity is both internally constructed, how you define yourself racially, ethnically, and culturally, and externally imposed. How do others perceive you racially, ethnically, and culturally? Racial identity develops a lot through socialization, right? We're all socialized around our different identities, where we're given positive or negative messages and the roles we're expected to play based on those identities. In the early years, young children, starting with babies at 3 months old, are become aware of racial markers. Then they progress to the ages of 2 to 3, where they're into identity and labeling, like who are they? And then by age of 3, we start to see dominant preferences in play group, like peer groups and friends, right? Where most young children will play with people like them, but then around age 3, we notice that children of color, Black children, Indigenous children, Latin children, they all, and white children, all develop a preference for white playmates. So we know that racial identity is impacting them, even though it's not fully developed, right? And then when they get older, around 5 and 6, they engage in stereotyping and bias. We're found in kindergarten, where they're now able to like apply negative characteristics to a group, right, based on race. So those are just some of the stages in the early years. And so the goal is now taking what we know about each adult group, right? Most of the racial identity development theories are done on adolescents and young adults, and applying that to young children, so that we can think about what does each group of young children needs. Because just like adults who are Black experience racial identity may be different in different stages in different ways than people who are Asian American or who Latin, same thing with young children and their families, right? They're going to experience this differently. So that was my thinking behind this. And so I'm inviting guests every month to join us. And I reached out to Yesenia and she offered to join us in this conversation. So we're going to go through the slides. I'll give some background and then I'll turn it over to Yesenia to add any thoughts that she wants to add. And it's funny, we've been talking, we've been friends for a while, we've been going back and forth on this stuff. And so I know that even talking about like terms like Latin and Latinx, Latino are problematic, right? When we're talking about a group of people. So we're going to start by what do we mean by Latin? And I'm going to say I took that from the contents title of a book. So the book Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in Their Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race by Beverly Daniel Tatum. I think it's chapter 8 or 9. She goes into beyond Black and white and she provides statistics on Latin, Asian, Indigenous group, and multiracial. I think multiracial is a whole separate chapter. Anyway, that's she starts it by what do we mean by Latinx or Latino or something. So that's where I got that from. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about this ethno-racial orientations, or how Latin children develop identity around race. And then a couple of the things we want you to think about as educators, parents, caregivers, right? The power of bilingualism, right? When we think about wanting to affirm their identity, why that's so important. Some of the cultures that we can find, the aspects of culture like collectivism, familia, right, in their communities, and how we want to affirm that in our early childhood spaces. And then lastly, some strategies for educators and caregivers. All right, and there's a code, the Blue R code will scan the framework in case you need that. And then we're good to go. All right, so what do we mean? Now, this is troubling because what terms do we use, right? Sometimes I like to write it out loud. If you know, Spanish is gendered, right? So Latino refers to the male and Latina would refer to women. And that became an issue as we were trying to like degender language and get rid of that. So Latinx was a term that was put out there that was like, people were putting the X in types of things. My friend who's non-binary goes by Mix, right? And their last name, they don't go by Mr. or Miss, they use the X, right? So we've seen X come in different places to replace these things. There's debate in the community whether it's so first of all, grammatically, and if you know Spanish and I am learning and you speak Spanish, that don't make no sense to say Latinx, right? It don't make sense. You just don't put an X in the word like that. So there's been pushback against that. Where Latin A does make sense and it gets you out of the O and the distinction of the gender, and we use Latin A. So I'm going to simplify and use that, but so it's gender neutral. But then the whole concept of being Latino, what does that even mean, right? Or Hispanic, which I'm going to be honest with you, I don't like the word Hispanic. I've never liked it and I don't use it, but I know it's very popular among certain groups. Kids out in Florida tell me they're Hispanic. I'll argue with them. As we were just saying, you're saying you tell us who you are and we're going to leave it at that. If you tell me you Hispanic, then you Hispanic, but I don't use that term. And I will say, I should preface this by saying I do identify as Afro Latina. I was born in Panama. My mother's Panamanian. I grew up in the States, and we'll talk about why I don't speak Spanish fluently. My kids are Colombian American. I adopted two Colombian kids. I am live from Cali, Colombia, where I'm giving this. I'm living in a South American country, working on becoming bilingual. So I do identify in the culture in different ways, right? So I think it's important. Um, but we're going to use Latin aid just to get around that term, but just know it's a gender neutral. But what are we talking about just in terms of Latin America, right? So this came up as people with roots or heritage in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Spain. And what does it say? And it of any race, right? Because what we forget is that being Latino or Hispanic or Latinate is not a race, right? Because you can be indigenous and considered Latino, you can be black and considered Latino, you could be white and be considered Latino. I don't know if there are any Asian Latinos. I could be wrong because I know there are Asian Jamaicans. So maybe there are even like Asian Latinos. I think a lot of the indigenous people here that I see in Colombia, there's a group of them that I think they're Asian. And they're like, no, no, I'm Colombian. And I'm like, that's so cool because you look to me like you're Asian. So I think there's some roots there in the indigenous parts of it. I'm not sure, but yeah, let's talk about that. So what does it mean to you, this whole term Latino, Latine, Yesenia?
I'm like all of it. I have had a love-hate relationship to like the labeling. And I
Yeah.
think my first introduction to any of this was like, yeah, all I could fill out in any form was Hispanic and then white. So that's
Mm-hmm.
all I could fill out, right? And that is what, since that's what's on the form, like that's what I thought I was. That's what I thought was the label. But growing up, my parents are very specific about like we're from Mexico. You're
Yeah.
Mexican. You're not
Mm-hmm.
American. Like this is who you are. So there was like this misunderstanding about like race and ethnicity and all of these things. So as a child, I'm like, race, I'm Mexican. That's my race. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what it is, right? But now that I'm older, that I've learned more, my relationship to it has shifted, right? I understood the like the where Hispanic came from. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I don't identify as that at all. Like there's no way for me to even feel that, especially because I do have indigenous ancestry, because
Yeah.
I know that my family has been around the Chihuahua area since before colonization. There's so much that went into it. So identifying as Latino, I'm like, okay, Latino back in the day was just for folks that were in South America. So in
Mm-hmm.
like the history changes, right? Like Hispanic
Yeah.
versus Latino, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I identified myself with Latinx because being queer and
Mm-hmm.
being non-binary and questioning and gender non-conforming, that's what felt better to me. And now whenever they ask my pronouns, I say they them in English, but I always add ella. Ella because there's like this sense of pride. Um being a woman in Latino culture or in a Mexican culture comes with like a great sense of pride because of all the things and hardships. So
Mm-hmm.
honoring that too. So it's very difficult. Like, what are you gonna
Yeah.
label yourself when this is just a label that was imposed on us? We're
Yeah. Yeah, for
30
sure.
plus, like 30 plus different countries
Mm-hmm.
with hundreds of dialects and languages, thousands of stories. Like we are as racially mixed as anybody else. If I would dare to say more, because we
Mm-hmm.
do have Asian Latinos.
Yeah.
There's huge Asian populations from where I'm from. So it's an interesting thing, and I always will say just respect what people want to label themselves. If you want to correct somebody and say, oh, you're not Hispanic or things like that, you got to check, like, yourself first,
Yeah.
because it's a way deeper relationship to things. Whenever anybody asks me where I'm from, I'm just like, well, what do you want to know? Like where I was born,
Hmm.
where I was raised, where I live now? Like what is it you're truly trying to get at? And to some folks it's an innocuous question. But
Yeah.
the same thing with like what do I identify? The most important thing you can do is let somebody self-identify because there's so much that comes along with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I get always get a kick out of the question, where are you from? I'm like, okay, let's break it down. Born in Panama, grew up in New Jersey, educated in DC. I was living maybe in Maryland or DC or New York. So what do you want to know? What do you want to know, people?
Like what
Right? But
neighborhood
it's
was
that thing of yeah, like where you can I can tell where I mean where I was born, where I grew up, and where I live are all different places, right? So, but I think you're right, getting at the heart of what do people want to know. I'll never forget I was camping, right, with my friends, and I got this friend, and he's from Texas, and his name is Spanish, right? Like first and last name. So this girl goes, "Where are you from?" And he goes, "I'm from Texas." And she goes, "Oh well, where are your parents from?" And he's like, "They're from Texas." And she goes, "Where are your grandparents?" I said, "Friend, stop. I know you're fishing for an answer that's not Texas, but you're not going to get it because he traces every generation of his family not to Texas. You're not going to hear him say Mexico, and that's what you want to hear. But he won't ever say that because his family doesn't trace their roots to Mexico. They trace their roots to Texas. So let it be. Like, accept the answer people give you." And no one had ever told her that before. And I wasn't being mean. I was just like, I know you're fishing for an answer. Same thing when I was in the Dominican Republic. She trying to get this man. I said, they don't claim African as their back. They're not African. They don't claim it. Yes, there were Africans in there. Yes, Haiti's real close in there. But some Dominicans, not all, some do not claim any type of blackness or African identity. That is their choice. Let it go. Stop fishing for an answer that you're not going to get and it's just going to compliment thing. Compliment thing. You tell me you identify Hispanic, okay. I know then to say that to reference you, to reference Hispanic when I'm speaking to you. It's not a term I like just because of the history of it. It's not a term I would use, but I can't tell you from South Florida where you really do. There's a huge Hispanic pride and culture that you can't be Hispanic if you want to be Hispanic. That's your choice, right? So, number
Yep.
one, right? We definitely got to get into that. And like you said, we're talking about a lot of countries, right? We're talking about everything through Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and then let's not forget Spain. And I don't even know if Portugal gets into this, but if you know about Brazil and you understand that Brazilians speak Portuguese for a reason, then you know that. So my Spanish teacher here in Colombia, we were having this conversation, and he was saying that Latin America did not include Haiti and Brazil because they don't speak Spanish. And I've never heard it. I thought Latin America included every Central American and South American country. But he says, no, if you tie it to the language, then we wouldn't include any Caribbean islands that don't speak Spanish. And we wouldn't include Brazil and we wouldn't include Haiti. And I thought that was interesting. Here, they talk about all of these countries in Latin America. What is even Latin America? We don't know. I grew up learning North America, Central America, and South America. And if you know the history, Texas was Central America for a long time, right? Nevada, Utah, parts of California, all of that land was Mexico, right? Or Central America, whatever we're calling it. So there's a lot of overlap there, right? But when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about those of you who work with children from any Central American and South American country. And I will say that Spanish is the language that we're talking about, but it's not only Spanish, right? Because Spanish is a colonizer language brought to all those countries. Their languages were indigenous. There were three groups of people that formed all of these countries we're talking about, right? Indigenous, whatever the indigenous groups were to that country, the Tainos, right, in Puerto Rico, different groups, different multiple groups, just like we have our indigenous people in North America, the African slaves who were brought over, the enslaved people from Africa who were brought over is another mix throughout all of these countries in some way or shape. There are some amount of people with from African descent. And then the Spaniards or Portuguese or European settlers who settled the land, right? So all of these countries, right? Whether it be Cuba, whether it be Dominican Republic, whether it be El Salvador, Mexico, they have a mixture of these three groups. Puerto Rico, right? Because these three groups were really prominent at the time. And then you have other people who immigrated there. Asian folks might have immigrated there, right? They didn't just go to Hawaii, right? They also probably came down into Central and South America, into Mexico, into other places. So you have Asian communities. Here in Colombia, there are a lot of Germans, right, that started coming here and immigrated here. I think it's they're in Chile. There's a huge Palestinian community. A lot of Palestinians came here. When I was in Medellin, there is a larger Jewish community, right? Jewish. So there's all these different people who immigrated to these different countries years ago and are part of the community as well too. But the main folks, right, are going to be descendants of the Spaniards or the European colonizers, descendants of the African slaves, and descendants of the indigenous, and then they're mixed, right? The same way we have that mixing in the United States, right? Um, Anything else you want to add before we move on? I just think it's fascinating. We could do the whole talk on just on this, but I want to keep it going.
No, I was literally gonna say the same thing. I think if if it the one thing that doesn't help people to understand is like you can't compare American colonialism to the way that colonialism worked in Latin America.
Yeah,
And I think like just looking into the historical context of it, you'll understand why people have more of like a misunderstanding of what race is there than it is here.
yeah,
And that goes into a lot like about mestizaje and like cosmic race stuff that isn't real. Like there's just
yeah,
this entire subculture and subgenre about how like colorism and anti-blackness works within our communities that is
yeah.
all rooted in the way that colonialism was different because of the Spanish and Portuguese than it was from like the English and
Yes. Yeah.
French.
And
And
just a big piece of that is like English settlers came married with families. So their relations with women of those countries were, through rape, through, it was different. But Portuguese and Spaniards sent young single men who were instructed to mate and reproduce with the lightest women they could find. There was a whole process. I can't remember the Spanish word for it, blanquiera, somewhere they were like trying to whiten the population, like a native population, by infusing them with Spaniards, right, settlers, right, who were light
yeah.
skinned. And so that was a process, and that says a lot for how you're colonized, right? Whether you're colonized as through marriage and offspring and children and reproduction, or not, right? Through the one drop rule, like we had in the United States and these other things as well. Sorry, I just had to throw that in because I love that
No,
bit of
it's the
knowledge.
truth. It's the truth. Like from where I'm from, there were over 200 indigenous communities, singular indigenous communities
Yeah.
that were recognized before colonialism. So
Hmm.
to think about how those communities have resisted and now there's only 68 that are recognized throughout the entire country of Mexico is it just there's a lot that goes into just simply labeling yourself Latino
Hmm.
and misunderstanding race.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So, just a few things, the Latinx population is fast growing. And again, if you're paying attention to what's happening in the United States, you have to understand that the harsh immigrant policies we're seeing and the dehumanization and of Latin people and immigrants is a part of this fast growing population, right? There is a huge theory, replacement theory, and other things like that, where they argue that they're being replaced by this group of people, right? And so they're trying to do a lot of these policies. They come in from that. So we know that Latinx children are a growing portion of the early childhood population. If they're not already in your program, they're going to be. And then their families bring different aspects of their culture, right? The multilingualism, multiple generations, and extended family networks tend to be something that you'll find a lot, not always, right? But sometimes. And so for early childhood, this means that you're going to increasingly be serving Latinx children and their families, and that we need to have equity minded practices and cultural and linguistic responsiveness, right? And so this was from the 2020 census that shows the different groups that they're measuring. Mexicans still are the largest population of Latino in the United States, followed by Puerto Ricans, El Salvadorians, Cubans, Dominicans, Hispanic, right? Where did all these people who come from who identify themselves as Hispanic, right? Guatemalan, Colombian, and Honduran, right? And there are also so many others. When I was doing some of the legal work in Tijuana in 2018, that was the first wave of migrants who were coming from other countries and they were coming up to Tijuana to claim asylum. That's when we first discovered Oh no, it was even in Pennsylvania at the detention center. Anyway, the multiple indigenous languages and the we needed interpreters, right? People were speaking Quechua, they were speaking other indigenous languages, like they didn't even speak Spanish, and that's was part of the reason they were fleeing and looking for asylum because they were being persecuted for being indigenous, right? So there's still that inner country turmoil where not speaking Spanish in one of these countries and being indigenous can force you to have to leave and seek out opportunities elsewhere, right? Because you're not. And that was just like shocking that we literally are virtually in court, and it's literally the person speaking Quechua, and then the Quechua taking it to the Spanish interpreter, and then the Spanish interpreter telling us to the English. And I mean, and this is about their life. This is about their freedom. And there's so many obstacles to understanding what's happening because that alone, right? Because of the different languages. And we're gonna move on and talk about language as well too. But before we do that, okay, so this is something that I found really fascinating, and in each one of these workshops, I'm just going to share a little bit from the adult theories and what they mean. So again, the article I'm using is a chapter in a book called Latina and Latino Ethno-Racial Identity Orientations, a Dynamic and Developmental Perspective, written by, ooh, I'm gonna mess up her name, Placida Gallegos and Bernardo Ferdman. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. And so they talk about their theory. And so to get there, they talk about Latinos and race and identity, right? And so, as to Yesenia's point, they talk about race being a really sticky category because Latinos often don't identify with one race, and race is seen as black and white. And then, depending on where you fall on that spectrum, you might not see yourself. So, they talk a lot about the need for intersectionality within understanding how Latinas identify themselves, right, ethnically and racial. So they coined the term ethno-racial orientation because it wasn't just race at play, but it was the mixing of the intersection of ethnicity and race. And they talk about how both can be social constructions, but they're both also, it really just depends on the context, right, of where they're coming from, right? So they said in 2000, across the country as a whole, not including Puerto Rico, 47.9% of Hispanics indicated they were white. 2% said they were black. 1.2% said they were American Indian, and 0.3% said they were Asian. 42.2% said they were some other race. So I think this is where we get into the right. If 42% of a group of people cannot put themselves into one racial category and are saying something else, right? What does that mean for how race is used to describe these folks? So they go on to talk about, yeah, how racism plays a factor, and then some other things to think about. It's how they identify their worldview. So they say the idea is that the worldview of Latinas and Latinos is closely related to how they interpret and respond to situations, and that worldview both influences and is influenced by their ethno-racial identity. So what are some of the worldviews that they were talking about? So they call one of the orientations that they talk about is whether they're Latino integrated, right? Whether they feel themselves as integrated into this Latino culture, whether they're Latino identified, right? Whether they identify in the first, they might say they might not even identify in Latino, or whether they're subgroup identified. And this is what I thought was super key, right? That we need to know about our young children coming to their families. How do those families describe themselves? Do they use the generic term like Latino or Hispanic, or do they say we're a Salvadorian, we're Guatemalan, we're Honduran, we're from Colombia, Peru, we're from these places? The sub-identified groups are very particular because they're identifying with their home country, where they're from, where they're born. It could even be the city, right? But typically it's the country. Then
Yeah.
there's Latino as other and undifferentiated denial. And then those who see themselves as white, right? Which is a fair proposition for like, I tell young kids, I don't know what I am. What race am I? I'm like, you got to tell me, right? If you're white, then you're white. If you're not white, you're not white, right? It's up to you. And so they don't know what to do. And there are white identified as well, too. So that's it. I'll stop there and let you jump in, and then I'll hit these points on the slide.
Yeah, I think it's very I seen the like the different categories put together like that. I'm like, "Oh, I see that," cuz it's also it's a journey through your life too, where
Hmm.
you end up in some of those categories. And growing up, I identify very much with like the state that we're born. We're from Chihuahua. Like even in
Mhm.
amongst ourselves, like it's a very different feeling to be from northern Mexico than it is to be from like southern Mexico or from like the central.
Ah.
I
Mhm.
think about like as I was looking through these subgroups, I'm like, oh, I see how like I've moved through them back and forth. And right now I would believe like Latino integrated is where I'm at because I'm more aware of the dynamics in the US and here and everything. So I think it's very um people can expand their view of it,
Mhm.
and at the same time, depending on barriers, it's hard to even go back and narrow it down for like various reasons, which is a lot of our youth and including myself, like we grow up thinking ni de aquí ni de allá, not from here and not from there, and so we have a hard
Mm.
time even identifying where or what. So like on the outside, for whatever purposes where we're at, we're gonna say one or the other. Assimilation and the violence that comes with it will also force people into any one of these orientations depending on what it is, but it's also again a very self-identified situation, and it's not very concrete. Like you can move in and out any of these
Yes.
depending on where you're from, like where how you were raised. Some parents don't want to teach you Spanish because it's violent. There is a lot of violence that comes with even hearing that. Some
Mhm.
folks want to learn Spanish or your native tongue because it's culture and needs to be pushed forward. And it's just that I'm like, oh, this is just a really nice way of putting it together of what like the confusion is throughout life growing up in a country that it doesn't claim you, but you should be able to claim it as part of like being an indigenous mixed race person. And it's just an interesting like journey to look at it.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And I will add that you might also not speak Spanish because someone told your mother not to teach you Spanish when you were a little kid. So we came to Panama get there. When I was 2 years old. Yeah, my youngest sister, who's 3 years younger than me, was born in the States, right? So I was almost 3 years old too when I came. I had two younger sisters, and the last one was born in the States. And so when we were old enough, I think we were enrolling my older sister in school. We all went with my mom, right? And like, yeah, she was told straight up, don't teach the younger ones Spanish if you want them to learn English. And there went my ability to speak my native language. And so, yeah, hearing stuff like that, you're young, my mother is Afro-Panamanian, right? She's Panamanian, but she's black too, and she didn't know what that meant. Being black in the United States means something different than it means in other countries. So of course she's gonna listen to these people telling her that this is important for her kids. So, and I've heard from other parents, like my older sister, who still speaks Spanish. She was the only one who kept her Spanish. She never taught my nieces Spanish, and a lot of times she just said it was difficult, right? Like she just didn't, it was harder to do. And I get it. I know it can be challenging, but that is something to think about, right? Like what we're told, what we're telling parents around that as well too. All right, I'm going to stop the share just for a minute because I updated. Let me see if I can. Maybe I don't have to do that. I updated the slides and wanted to. I'll stop the share and then I'll come back. So one of the other things that you said that I think was important. Hold on, we were talking. Oh, about how you can change, how these orientations can change. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in like my personal context, again, I started out a very that subgroup identified, right? Like that was just all I knew growing up. And it was because my parents really wanted us to hold on to our culture. When we came to the US, they're like, eres mexicana, no eres americana, you're not American. And it was something that was just brought in us as a sense of like self and also like protection, I would like to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was already reading before kindergarten. In Spanish, like
Mm-hmm.
right, all of the education that I got at home was in Spanish, and so when like we came to Vegas first, and they had actually the teacher was teaching in Spanish, which is really interesting for back in the late 90s, like
Mm-hmm.
to be in that space like, and then moved to Nebraska, Grand Island, where it's a whole different thing. They don't even have ESL courses, and they put me in special education courses. and are teaching trying to teach me how to read. And I think about like my parents really zeroing in on like, this is where we're from, these are our customs, this is the culture, really pushing us into like just being within our community. Like there was a
Mhm.
small group of people that were from Mexico, that were from Chihuahua, and we had like our things together. It was just very specific, but it was as a way to ensure that, we were protected from the outside influence, because I saw what it meant, and I had to translate the racism for my parents, because I
Yeah.
was the one that was learning English for the whole family first. And
Mhm.
in those instances, I had to say, this is exactly what he said. What did he mean by that? Like, and have to have that in exchange with my parents in that moment. Um, to zooming into now, being that Latino integrated wide lens, understanding that like a lot of us share that experience and a lot of us don't. I
Mhm.
had in my classes that were not ESL, they were trying to get rid of my accent. They said that my accent was so bad, I had to talk with a pencil in my mouth for most of my
Mm.
classes. As a kid in elementary school, I would walk around with a thesaurus and a dictionary because they said I kept repeating the same words too much in my paragraphs. Mind you, I'm in fourth grade and I had just learned English in third grade. So
Mm.
there's this like going from that to understanding like, oh, I'm not the only one. And also like, I'm from this little mining town in this state, in this other country, but there's so many other folks that are going through something similar.
Yeah.
To me, it's like going through that whole thing. I can see myself going through a lot of these, and then identifying some of my family members that are in white identified or undifferentiated denial. Like it's just an interesting place to look at, that I see some folks that are willing to learn and move, and I see some folks that aren't willing to learn, or don't have, I don't want to say don't have the capacity to learn, but at this,
Desire, maybe.
yeah, desire,
Yeah. They're
to be.
happy where they're at, and they don't really want to rock the boat, change anything. Like they just want to go be where they're being. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I definitely see this too as like again my experience, and I also want to point out what I think is so important that we have to know for all you early childhood educators and caregivers, knowing like Yesenia talked about the positive racial identity, ethnic identity she was getting from her family, the tie to the community. That's really important. But I also want you to know that not everybody gets that. Like, okay, so think about it. Panama, my mom didn't know any other Panamanians when she came to the United States. Married to an American, right? Married to an American military serviceman, didn't know any other Panamanians. All the Latino friends she started to make were Puerto Rican. We were in the East Coast, right? So it wasn't that she didn't want to, but she didn't have the cultural connections you need to really teach us about Panama, right? Like it'd be one thing if she integrated into this little mini Panama community and like we would have been like, doing, but it was just her. It was just her and of all of her children, right? And her husband at the time, and she didn't do it like for different reasons. I don't think, I just don't think she thought it was important. Again, she wanted us to assimilate, she wanted us to be American. We are black, we are going to be perceived as black before we're ever going to be perceived as Panamanian. So my older sister had this issue the most, right? She's a little lighter than me but still black looking, black presenting, I should say. And she felt very Panamanian, right? She's new to the America. She's like 9, 10 years old, and she didn't fit in with young black girls at the time. But they looked at her and assumed she was black, and they were mad at her for not acting the way they thought a young black girl should be. So it's
Yeah.
different for everyone's experience. So you need to know, right, what's happening in the kid's family. Are they really like about the home culture, the home life, the home country? Are they really doing that positive? Parents do positive racial and ethnic socialization, or are they more about assimilating, right? Or are they more about like you can be proud at home, but in school we want you to blend in, be American, be right? Because there's all different types of strategies that parents are using. And what's best if we know the strategy instead of just assuming that we know, right? Talk to the parents, right? What do you want your kid? How do you want your kid to maintain their home culture and their new culture? That's super important.
Like in the context around the community that you live in, if it's a mainly like white community, understanding that this may only be happening at home amongst like them and their siblings and their parents, And when they're out in society, like they're getting a different thing. Whenever anything came up about like South America or Latin America, they turned to me and they're like, "You eat that, right?" Like I would be in charge of bringing pupusas, but I'm from Mexico. Like I'm not from El
Pupusas
Salvador.
are Salvadorian, man.
But I come with pupusas or like I would come and share like Mexican candy, and then at
Mm,
that time there was like this big scare of Mexican candy being lead and then nobody eating my candy. Like there's just so many things that
yeah,
went
yeah.
in understanding. Like I never felt safe at school or in
Mm,
like the only times I felt safe was at home. But
yeah.
that made me really militant about my identity, where I was
Yes, yes.
like to the point where I was like, I learned I didn't have to do the Pledge of Allegiance because I'm not from this country. So I would sit down in elementary school telling them, I'm not going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not from here. I'm
Mm,
special. And I would get in trouble. But like, it's definitely a different scenario because even between me and my sisters, the way that we either assimilated or fought against that assimilation
yeah.
was very different.
Yeah, yeah, in my own family too, right? Like I wanted to be fully assimilated. I love going to school. I'm a nerd. I got a bunch of degrees. Like I'm up here doing this work. And my siblings were like, nah, 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 nah. They didn't have that same relationship with schooling that I did, right? Again, same family household that we grew up in, but very different relationship to how they assimilated. We spent a lot of time in predominantly white neighborhoods and white spaces, right? And how they assimilated and how we didn't, and schooling, right? If you're gonna assimilate to the dominant culture of schooling, which tends to be white dominated, then you're going to do well. And I tell people one of my special powers is I grew up learning how to make white people feel comfortable around me. And it worked. Like that got me far. And I don't do it on purpose anymore. It still comes out because it's just the way I realized that I could disarm people who looked at me and didn't know what to think. I could easily magically let that go by being a certain way. And that's just became who I am, right? It's not intentional anymore. I was intending before. I wanted you to not see me as a black person. I wanted you to just see me as this normal person. Now I'm like, no, I want you to see me as a Afro Latino black, mother of Colombian Afro Colombian teenagers, right? Like I want that all of those things to be together. But that yeah, it's really different how we engage and how we assimilate. So back to young children, just remember again, they're forming their racial ethnic identity early. So they're noticing things like skin tone, language, culture, and they're trying to figure out where I belong, right? And so again, this is not, I just shared this quick story with an anecdote with a friend of mine who's just, she had two things going for her in growing up in the South. She's Jewish and she's also Italian. And when she was little, she thought she was black because she thought her skin was darker as an Italian white person than other white people, right? And then she was ostracized by all the other kids for being Jewish, that her best friend was the Muslim girl who was also ostracized. So, one, you grow up thinking you're black. Two, you grow up and your best friend is Muslim because you're both told that you can't hang out with the rest of the Christian kids, right? That's a lot of intersectional going on. There's a lot going on over there, right? So she's constantly trying to figure out where she belongs. And she grew up not really knowing, right? Because to be Jewish in a place where Jewish wasn't, it took years before they had their first temple, right? And other places to go. They didn't have those things for a long time. The community wasn't there. They were the community, right? So the same thing your kids are going through. If they are living in a community where there's not a lot of people who sound like them and look like them, or maybe everybody speaks Spanish, but nobody's from their country, right? They're going to be constantly questioning who they are and where they belong, especially if they're surrounded by predominantly a white community, right? A lot of white adults and what other white children. A lot of Latino children are growing up though in predominantly segregated Latino spaces, right, where there are a lot grouped together, and then often sometimes with low income African Americans, you might get one white kid, but not many, right? Most of them are growing up in hyper segregated communities. So imagine now taking all of these people from all these 100 different countries that have different histories, different dialects, different ways of being Latino, speaking Spanish, and they're all living in the same community and they're all being treated against badly because they share this fake culture, but they also don't get along with each other because history, maybe El Salvadorians and Guatemalans were beefing. I don't know, right? Like we don't know the history of these countries, right? And so, but they're all forced to live together. And so there's a lot that's happening that these kids are going through. So they might be hearing stuff from their community about another group, and then they're in school with that group, right? Because there's just a lot of dynamics at play. So again, intersectionality is super important to Latina ethno-racial identity, because everything is interrelated and it's dependent on the contextual influences, right? And so that's going to be important to know about your families, and you want to get as much information that they feel safe giving if they know that this is a safe environment. So questions like, how many generations have you guys been living in the United States, right? Because if their parents are first generation, that's going to be different than if their parents are second or third generation, right? Like, and then those folks don't always get along sometimes because white supremacy and colonial culture teaches us how to infight, right? So you get recent immigrants being treated poorly by those who immigrated before, sometimes, not all the time, right? Because the more you assimilate to American culture, the less likely you are to be accepting of a new grave of people, right? Oh, they're not like us, right? And I think we're seeing this a little bit when we see these videos with ICE and their Latino ICE agents, and people are calling them out. And it's like they don't see themselves as an immigrant that they are going after because their parents were born here, maybe, and they were born here, right? So, like, their generations in, not always, but right, I think there's something to that as well. And so, again, multiple identities are part of these ethno-racial groups that we're going to look at, right? You could be Latina plus US American plus Indigenous plus Afro, or you could be white, right? You could also be all these different things. And then our job is to really get to know them as individuals, as families, as the part of the group that they are in, naming the different cultures, providing mirrors and windows, and validating home heritage. So I put in, this is the slide I just added. And so this is what I was talking about from the article. So this is table 3.1, Latino identity orientations as adaptive strategies. And I will include the article in the resources that I put for the subscribers so you can take a look at it. But these are the different orientations. And so they talk about the lens that they have, how they might identify or prefer to identify, how they might view Latinos positively, very positively, my group okay, others maybe not, right? Whites, how they might group white people, complex, distinct, not central, could be barriers, could be blockers, right? Different things. The framing of race, how they might come to see race, key challenges, most adaptive for behavioral manifestations and limitations, right? So I just wanted to share those with you. I won't spend too much time on it because it's out of context without reading the entire chapter, but it just gives you an idea of what they mean by ethno-racial orientations, right? That these are different orientations, being Latino immigrated, integrated, or subgroup identified, or white identified, or Latino as other. All right, we're talking about language. Let's keep talking about it. This one is just so key, right? Hopefully, everyone knows now who's watching this video, is working with children, that being bilingual is a superpower, and we should really want that. I think there was a lot of misconceptions about how language learning develops. Um, there is that period of language learning for some young children they call the silent period, where they are learning English, but they also have their other language, their native language, and they kind of stopped speaking. And people thought that that was a bad thing, but actually it was a sign that their brain was processing both languages and that they would start speaking again when they could do so perfectly in both languages. And I've seen that play out with a friend of mine, his son. He's like, my son's not talking. I was like, he's making sense of it. When he's ready, he's going to hit you with the Spanish and English together, but he's not going to say something that sounds bad, right? Like, so he's just in his mind, they're a lot more quieter. I think that stage scared a lot of adults thinking, oh, this is messing them up, right? It's not messing them up. To learn another language, it's very vital. It's very important. I think as someone who was born in a Spanish speaking country and I do not fluently speak Spanish, it's been one of the biggest challenges I've had to deal with my whole life in terms of my identity, in terms of not wanting to claim being Latino, Latina, Latine, because how can you be something you don't speak the language, right? And we see this more and more with kids who are more generations brought over and they're not learning Spanish and they don't know how to feel in terms of how can I be Latino? How can you tell me that I'm not American because I'm Latino, but I don't speak another language and English is all I know, right? It's a huge issue. And so I'm sure there's something you want to add about that too, Yesenia.
Yeah, when it comes to this, like growing up, it was seen as a learning disability for me. I had to
Mm,
be in ESL and in special education courses the fact it blocked me from like gate, it blocked me from AP courses, from honors courses, even though I was getting straight A's. It was seen as a learning impediment that I spoke another language until a
Mhm.
teacher of mine, a biology teacher, told me you shouldn't be in this class. You should be in my honors course. And he found out that they weren't letting me because I had ESL for so long. And
Mm.
so I always knew, and I always thought being able to speak two languages was important. I mean, here's a little 8-year-old reading from the Bible during church in Spanish, like from the Bible, a large text with giant words at 8 years old. And it never made sense with the way that teachers treated me and the way that administration treated me, or the way that other students, because the students would see me getting taken out of class for my special education course. And so to them, that along with the fact that I was twice as tall as all the other kids with long black hair, to them it seemed like I was just a kid that got held back, and so I got made fun of even more for that. And so they thought that I
Mm.
wasn't even smart enough to be in those classes. And so looking at how folks look at bilingualism now, I wish that I can understand Portuguese and I can understand Italian and I can understand French. I want to speak them, but I don't. But I'm so in awe of people that are like trilingual,
Mhm.
quadrilingual, that speak all these different languages, because we know that there's a lot more that is lost in translation. There are words that in Spanish that can't be described in English, and vice versa. And the same thing with other things. So now as I've been working on translation, it's it's such a beautiful thing to be able to speak in multiple languages, because things are a little different depending on the culture. Just to even just say querer. There's no way to explain what querer is in English that
Mhm.
like has the depth of it. And I wish that my family had never been separated from our indigenous roots, because I know that there's even more things that were lost there. So I hope that like folks that want to learn, have never had the ability to learn, or do have this, like really take this as a moment to use it. It is a superpower. It is beautiful. Like, let's empower our kids to say, yeah, I can translate, I can read, write, and speak it. Or if I can't, it doesn't matter if you can't speak it right, because it is a colonizer's tongue.
Mhm.
Like, it is something that was taken from us. But having that power to speak multiple languages and it not be made fun of, like that is a beautiful way to grow up, versus being told, don't speak it, this is horrible, you're doing wrong, your accent is wrong, you are like inherently wrong for not speaking this language. And so to hear like the administration trying to make English the whole this official thing is just so
Mhm.
reminiscent of Arizona in 2010 and all
Yeah.
the like it's just it's this icky, horrible thing to not be able to speak however you want to speak. And how is that not part of like First Amendment rights, you know? But I'm not gonna go into that.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it's difficult, right? Like I adopted two kids who's fluent in Spanish and I know a lot more now, but I didn't know any in 2021 when they showed up at my house. I thought I knew a little Spanish and I was like, yeah, no, you know nothing. And so, it's been a challenge. And I think the hardest part for adults, Americans, I will say Americans, in this is that you're uncomfortable when you don't know what people are saying about you. And you know what I realized? That is a good spot to be in. Sit in that uncomfortableness. It is uncomfortable, damn it. But you gotta let it go. There's nothing you can do about it. Like if your only response to that uncomfortableness is to prevent them from speaking that language, then that's a problem, right? It is uncomfortable. I a lot of times in the beginning, especially when I was just hosting the kids, like, and they were like going back and forth and it was getting heated, like I just wanted to make sure I didn't need to step in, right? Like now they're just totally, but it's someday, sometimes I'm like, I really want to know what they're talking about. And then I would get a clue and I'm like, they are talking about Marvel movies. I'm glad I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, right? Like they were talking about something so silly that I'm glad I didn't know. There are times when I do want to know, like they post memes and stuff, their little, WhatsApp little pictures, and I screenshot that and translate it because I do want to know one if they're saying anything inappropriate, and just to have an idea. And like my son will be like, I'll mention something. He's like, oh, you must have been, yeah, yeah, but I look at what you post and I translate it because I want to know what's going on in your life, right? And even though I can speak Spanish a lot better now, like they talk so fast and they use like juvenile slang. I can't understand a lot of what they're saying. Even my mother, who's a native Spanish speaker, troubled, right? But that's the difference between Panamanian Spanish and Colombian Spanish and Puerto Rican Spanish, right? When they had their friends, group of friends in New York who were Honduras and Mexican and El Salvadoran, and my kids are Colombian, I said, do you guys always understand each other? And they all said no. No, they'll be speaking Spanish and realize that they do not understand what the other person is saying in Spanish because it's very rooted in the specific country and city of that country. Cali is the third largest, second or third largest city in Colombia, right? But they speak slightly different here than they do in Bogota or than they do in Medellin, right? So it's even that regional part of the language is super important. Yeah.
Growing up with that, like I'm from a very specific place in Mexico, right? In Chihuahua. So even the way that we speak is made fun of in other places because there's more country. And we say the CHs and the SHs like sh, and they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be like a hard ch. So when I
Mm-hmm.
say leche, ocho, mucho, people are like they know exactly where I'm from. And I think
Mm.
how like that, even like looking down at the bottom, like down to the micro of it, and then I expand out. Like I think about my parents coming here, my mom not having access to education past fourth grade, and the fact that she came to a whole other country, taught herself a whole other language, how to read, write, speak it, and do math with a fourth grade reading. Like I need folks to understand the kind of intelligence it takes to be able to be as an adult to learn another language. And so I commend you for being there and doing the work and like being uncomfortable, because that is where growth happens. And
Yeah,
I just wish that everybody spoke multiple languages because it's
I know.
beautiful.
And it's, you know, and early childhood is the time to do it. Our brains are wired to learn multiple languages in the first 10 years of life. I know people don't understand this and they don't get it, but it's super true. So in New Jersey, I took childcare because, of course, I wanted to work with children. My childcare teacher, Miss Paps, she was the best. She put her daughter in a preschool where every day there was a different language. So they did English, Spanish, French, sign language, and then maybe the other one was like German or something, but it was five languages. Her daughter went to preschool there all the way up until she came out of there with English plus a couple other languages, right? Like she would got able to pick up a couple more. Why don't we start teaching languages till eighth grade in high school? We are missing the window of biological development. The brain receptors that do language are primed to learn multiple languages in the first 10 years of life. But we're so backwards in this country, right? And it's because a lot of us adults weren't taught a second language. So we're not going to do something to the kids that we didn't do. And, you know, and so we got to break that whole cycle. We got to force ourselves. You know, I told my kids, look, of course I want you to learn English, but I'm not going to make you do it on your own. I'm going to learn Spanish. We are going to be bilingual together, right? That's been the goal. And I know that's not always the goal of some adoptive families. They're like, the kids will learn English and that's it. Or they'll say, the kids will forget their Spanish. And that irks me. I have to like really check myself because I'm like, wanting your kid to forget their native language is so sad to me just because it's really triggering for me. It's a personal thing that I've had to deal with. And so it's really challenging. And some of the kids, though, they're younger kids who are adopted, they don't want to keep learning Spanish. They want to just only speak English because they're dying to assimilate and to fit in. Their family speaks English. They're in schools with English. They don't want to be attached to their culture. And I think that's our job as adoptive parents that we have to like, no, no, here's a racial mirror. Here's an ethnic mirror. Like we are both. And like you are Mexican and American. You're from this community and that's okay. But I know it's harder to do when the parents are not from there. So really one of the best ways to affirm Latin identity is to really lock into bilingualism, helping kids maintain their home heritage language while learning English. It's going to support their identity, their family bonds, and their academic and cognitive development. The research is clear. Bilingual children develop enhanced cognitive flexibility, problem solving, and cultural competence, being able to navigate two languages. And in the early years, we want to make sure that we have dual language resources, homeschool language continuity, and positive messaging around children's languages, right? And learning the base words. And it's okay. I tell my kids, make fun of me. Do you know how bad we tease the hell out of my mom for messing up words? Like to this day, she say wrestling, she say wrestling. And we would we would like give her the business over that. And now as an adult getting made fun of, what did I say the other day? I tried to say add $80 and $80, and I said 100, 70, and she said, ah, and I was like, what is it? And she's like, cientos, mom, cientos, 80. And I was like, ay, 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 right? But I need that. I need her to like laugh at me and do that so I can like push myself and like work on it, right? Nothing's perfect. One of the best things I learned in my Spanish lessons was to like have fun with it, play with the accent, be laugh at yourself. Like, yes, you sound like an idiot. It's okay. Like, because if you're so worried about that, it's just going to get in the way, right? So I tell teachers too, talk to the young children and be surprised. I could read a book to preschoolers in Spanish before I ever started taking Spanish lessons. Like, you know how to read it. You don't know, you might be messing up the words, but practice just reading a simple children's book in Spanish, and then let the kids correct you when you mess up, right, on certain words as well too. It's a really powerful thing to do.
I
I'm gonna
saw
keep
this.
on. Go ahead. I'm gonna just advance to the next slide.
I saw this video on TikTok. It's kind of going viral about this woman who said graveyard wrong in Spanish. The
Hmm.
way that she connected graveyard was basically like translated to foot in dead people, like on dead people, but brain working, like she was trying to translate and break
Hmm.
it. And then people in the comment section were trying to do the same thing, connect to words that they knew. And then they all were like, this is what I thought, how you said it. And somebody corrected me. So I think it's a beautiful way for people to really learn how to do that. And kids do it naturally. They don't know
Yeah.
when they say something, they'll make up what it
Oh yeah.
looks, it sounds like, feels like. And so it's the same situation. And I,
Yeah. I always love my daughter told me she thought the letters USA, she thought that you said it USA. I was like, you know what? It should be USA. That sounds so much better. She's like, why is it USA? That threw her for a loop. She really thought, and I love hearing those things, like things that they didn't know until they heard someone say it. And they're like, oh, that's how you say it, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's great. Playing with language and families is a really beautiful thing too. Another thing, familial culture, collective culture, is a big part of many Latinx communities, right? So this idea of familia, extended kin networks, collective responsibility, typically, and for different reasons, I think sometimes I think we need to be careful on borderline stereotypes, right? There's the stereotype or the myth, right? That in every Latino household, there are 25 people living in there, right? And like, I know people, but they tend to live together in bigger families. But this is also an African American tradition, right? Let's back it up to when Barack Obama was president and people started to lose their minds. Why? Because Michelle Obama's mama moved into the White House and everybody's like, your mom can't live in the White House. I'm like, yes, she can. She's gonna come and help me raise my kids in the White House. That's such a normal thing. Like none of us took that as weird, but for a lot of white American families, no, grandparents don't live together. But here in Colombia, let me tell you something. The thought of you have three adult children and yourself. You think your three adult children are all going to go pay rent somewhere and you're going to pay a mortgage too? It makes absolutely no sense. And I mean adult, like 25 and up. Until you are married, and even then you might be living at home, you stay in the same house. It doesn't make sense to everyone go out and pay separate bills. Now you got four households, four rents, four electric bills, four what? No, I will say it makes privacy a little tough in some of the communities here, but they're working on that. Most of the houses are built. I have five bathrooms in my house because they understand that everybody needs a bathroom and then there needs to be a bathroom for guests. You know,
yes,
right? Because that's how the culture is, right? Like everyone's going to live together. So there is this big familiar stuff. And what does that mean? It means the preschooler in your life might live in their house with their tia and their tio or their primo or, anyone, right? Abuela, any of these people might be living in the family, or even if they don't live with them, they might see them, like spend real time with them several times a week, spending nights, days, lots of times, right? It's a big difference in the culture there. Collectiveness, right? A lot of non-white European American cultures are very collectivist as opposed to individualism, right? So they don't have that rugged bootstrap, pull yourself up, individual meritocracy. They're more like collective. We work together, communal and collective with the earth, right? When you look at a lot of the indigenous folks, right, they have all these traditions that are rooted in their connection to the earth and to each other. So you're going to find communal values, respect for elders, a lot of use of home languages, community and tradition. And then again, remember, these things shift the more time the family has spent assimilating to the United States, right? So again, remember the context. Is the family new here or have they been here for generations? If they've been here for generations, have they held on to some of these cultures and traditions, or have they let them go and replaced them for more American traditions, right? These are the things you want to know about your families. And you want to engage families as partners, honor their home culture and practices. Now, again, every teacher will say, well, what if they want to look? We all know that families do things differently. And I was quick to tell my kids all the time, oh, is that what you do at home? That's lovely. Here in school, though, we can't do that because it's not okay for you to do that to someone else here. At your house, I can't tell you what to do. That's your house. Listen to your mommy and daddy. Here, though, in school, that doesn't work for us as a group. Kids understand that. They told, but what we do, what they told me, they didn't tell me that. They said, your family's wrong. What you do at home is bad. And you need to do what we're teaching you in school. And that's the difference between affirming a kid's home culture. Oh, is that how you do things at home? Oh, you're allowed to just go up and smack her in the head when she takes something from you? Okay, bro, but you can't do that here in my classroom. No, 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 that doesn't work here, right? And they probably can't do that at home, right? That's the far-fetched example, right? But the sharing of stuff, right? I am shocked how much my kids share things, clothes, everything. And to me, growing up in what? You can't borrow my stuff. What are you talking about? No, right? So communal kid might think, oh, I can use your pencil case. Why not? We share everything. No, that might be how things happen in your house. But here, kids, we have individual stuff. So please don't take her stuff without asking, because that's our rule in school. We can have those different things. We're still honoring the home culture, but also setting limits for how we're going to operate in this shared space together. And of course, providing culturally relevant materials as well, too. Any thoughts on familial culture and collectivism in Latinx communities, Yesenia?
I mean, I think all of this sets true for multiple of our kids. I would add that newly arrived immigrant children may
Mm-hmm.
not be staying with their parents. They could
Mm,
be with a
yes,
distant
good
relative.
point.
It's like, and they may not even be like actual blood. And so when it comes to helping them create ties, it's important to honor the fact that their tia may be coming in, their tia might not even know English. So
Mm-hmm.
are we creating a space where um the those parents in that moment, because that's what they become, right? In that moment they're becoming parents to our kids that are here, like are we creating space for them to engage in the classroom and how to, because my mom was still coming to class even though she didn't understand, I was translating for her, may have not told her everything that the teacher was saying, but I in case I got in trouble. But I think it's important for us to also create that I don't want to say capacity, but maybe ability for them, like
Mm-hmm.
openness for them to come to us, because they're already they're already displaced, right? So it doesn't mean to be like 3 4 5 times displaced because
Yeah.
now you don't have your parents here.
Yeah.
uh but
And a lot of the refugees and migrants that we met were, yeah, they had a child with them that maybe wasn't their child, but the parent, they were asked to take them, whether they're aunt or uncle or brother and sister. You get a lot of times older brothers and sisters. We had a lot of that case where the older brother came first and then the younger brother came and now he's standing in as the parent for them. Yeah, there are lots of different family structures and we want to be welcoming. And, typically, and I've also learned this because of having adopted kids, that a lot of American school structures are very not welcoming to diverse families, right? So asking for things like baby photos is really challenging when you adopt teenagers who don't have baby photos because they've been in care their whole lives, right? And family trees are really difficult for people who are not connected to their families, right? So there are ways that you can talk about family, but every time I did an assignment with my students, I had them do this cultural identity notebook, and the first part was their family's history and education. And they would say, "Well, I don't really." I said, "You tell me who your family is. I'm not saying it has to be this person. You, I'm saying talk to the people who raised you about their level, about their experiences in education, and that could be your mom and dad, that could be your aunt, that could be your grandparent, your foster mom. I don't care. You're telling me, I'm not telling you who's in your family. You're telling me who's in your family. Giving people that flexibility and opportunity to name family is super important, right? And to bring in other people and substitute families and understand that families are large and diverse, right? And, I grew up in a household with five siblings, and I am the only product of my mom and dad. So all of my siblings, we share the same mom, but different dads, but we never called each other half brothers and half sisters or step brothers and step sisters ever. And then even my sister and my brother from my dad that I didn't meet till I was a teenager, we still don't call each other half sisters and half brothers or step sisters and step brothers. We are brothers and sisters, period. We share either one parent, and that's okay. And so my friends would want to force that on me. Oh, they're your stepsister, you're your half sister. And I'm like, what does that mean? Well, you only share one parent. They're not your full sister. And I'm like, what, really? That's just my sister, right? Like, I'm not taking these things. So we have to like recognize these different families.
There's,
Yeah, go ahead.
I, I wanted to mention too, growing up as the oldest sibling, there's something to being an immigrant kid here in the United States where you also have to recognize that these children are given a lot of responsibility. The culture bearer for their for their not just their family but their community. And so there's already a lot of pressure on top of everything else. And so if they are here without their parents, like the pressure to be and take advantage of every opportunity and everything is constantly there.
Yeah,
And the responsibility of it's weighs really heavily. And
yeah,
then that comes out in various different ways. Like some youth will definitely come out and be really expressive and forthcoming with it, but others that will force them to just be really late, like really taken aback and just inside their brain and not be able
mhm,
to express themselves because they don't want to get in trouble or it's too much. And so it youth deal with it in a different way with this kind of power dynamic too.
yeah. Yeah, it's all, and that's the thing, getting to know the kid because they're so different. My son and daughter, who had the same experiences growing up, are so different in how they processed it, how they processed the family separation, the adoption, everything was very different for them. So, good points. All right. So, lastly, we want to give you some practical strategies for educators and caregivers. Creating environments that are culturally responsive with materials. Of course, this is the bare minimum. I think a lot of us do this and we stop there, right? I know a friend, she's doing a workshop that's like beyond books and dolls, right? Like, we got to get into this stuff deeper. But that's a good place to start if you haven't started, right? Make sure your books, your toys, your images reflect different cultural groups. I forgot to add this resource to the slides, but I'll add it. Teaching Central America is this great resource from Teaching for Change, where they have all these lessons and even elementary lessons about teaching about the different countries of Central America, right? Imagine a young kid from one of those countries coming in the classroom and like kids are learning, right? They're learning about the difference between Honduras and Belize and El Salvador and all these different places, right? Integrate the heritage language, like we said, label classroom items in English and Spanish or other home languages. Invite families to share words, right? Invite kids to speak both languages that they're learning and then the language that they, that they're native for. Facilitate family engagement. Invite extended family. Celebrate home traditions. Build community events that really honor Latin culture. And if you don't have to do all this, there are plenty of stuff happening in your community too. Use your community as a resource. Folks like Yesenia and her community work, they would love to come into schools and be a resource and share the work that they're doing. You got to be invited and also, pay them like you would pay white folks to come into your school as well too. We'll add that part. Support identity talk. Ask children, what do you speak at home? What traditions do you have? And validate their response, right? Know that culture is more than just food and dress, right? But don't forget about those important things like what do they like to eat? What makes them feel special? What do they eat when they're sick? What do they eat on their birthday, right? Things like that, where they can really get to share who they are. And then monitor and challenge bias. Ensure Latinx children are not invisibilized, which happens a lot, stereotyped or monolingual pressured. Advocate internally for policies that support dual language and family culture. And there can be other resources, other suggestions, but those are some ones that we wanted to start with as well. We also want you to think about reflecting. What are some current practices in your classroom home that affirm or limit Latinx children's identity, right? What are some things? Do you have maps of Central and South America and other countries, different flags represented? Do children know how to greet kids in different languages? You can choose one change you will implement in the next week. Maybe you'll do some bilingual labeling or invite families to share. And again, not pressure families. You got to invite them and make them want to come, but also know that some can't. Like, I think this is the hardest part is that not all people of color want to be your tour guide into learning about ourselves. Some of us do. I am one of those people. And so finding those people who are willing to do it is great, but also respecting the people who don't want to be your informational person, right? Because not everyone has a capacity for that. But there are people who do it, and then commit to ongoing learning, really deepen your understanding of Latin histories, language, and communities. Even if you pick just one country at a time and you start learning history. And you know where's a good place to start? Start with the Wikipedia page. It gives you the basic information, and then you can go from there, right? And look at children's books, right? I used to always bring in diverse children's books, and I learned so much about different countries and cultures from those books. And then I would further the study around those as well, too. So here are some resources. When you get the slides, when you click on these, they'll bring you to a website. So I love Latinx parenting. I follow her, the lady who runs it on her Facebook. She actually spoke at one of our summer institutes. So I'll actually include a link to that as well. Embrace Race is a great organization, and they had a webinar just recently. It's not out yet, but I know they just did a webinar on same thing, supporting Latino children in your classroom. So but this was something they did called Building Solidarity Among Black and Latinx Kids and Families. And I thought that was a pretty cool resource. And then the Latino Network popped up, and they have different resources as well, too. I'm sure there'll be more. I'll ask Yesenia to share more, and we'll include those when we share the slides. I am going to make a reflective workbook to go along with this so that you can go back and watch the video and answer questions as well, too. Um, and that's pretty much what we got for today. I am due at another webinar that started 15 minutes ago. But I just want to remind you that this is a workshop within a series. So we have the next two scheduled. So October 28th was today, Affirming Latina. I put Latinx identity in the early years. Thank you, Yesenia Moya, for joining us as our special guest speaker. Next month, we're doing November 24th. It's the Monday, I think, Affirming Indigenous Native Identity in the Early Years, with this wonderful woman named Candace, who runs a great site called Relentless Indigenous Woman. Yes, I think that's it. And so she has actually a toolkit for early childhood educators on Indigenous identity. So she's going to update the toolkit, give us a special discount, and we're going to talk about that. And then December 16th, we have a professor at the College of New Jersey talking about affirming Asian identity in the early years. Her name is Min Sue. So I'm super excited. I haven't scheduled January, February, and March yet, but I am proud of myself for scheduling October, November, and December. Reminder, as a subscriber, you get access to all of these. So all you will have to register for the Zoom link. So I like to know who's coming. But we will record them even if no one shows up, and you can watch them at your own pace, and still you'll get the workbook and all of the resources as well too. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Thank you again so much, Yesenia. Is there any last words you want to share before we wrap up?
It was just really good to see you and really good to have this conversation. I'm just glad that like our kids are gonna be in a better place than we were because stuff stuff sucks and it's getting harder. But as long as we have people willing to do this work, it's I think we'll be in a better place soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Tori, for joining us. We had someone else here and they took off, but yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much. And it is okay if I share your contact information in case anybody wants to reach out to you. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll see you next month at our next discussion. Thanks all.